G'day, how you going? In this video I'll be painting a standard Legionnaire from the Dark Angels Legion using the Easy Glaze method. Feel free to paint along or sit back and enjoy, and let's get started. So starting off, I've primed the model in a standard grey spray. Feel free to use a black spray for this if you prefer, or if it's all you have, it won't really make much of a difference. But whichever you prefer to use, make sure you get a base coat down nice and smooth of the main black colour your marine's going to be. On this Dark Angel scheme, I'll be using 2 thin coats Doom Death Black for this. It's always important to thin your paints down. As you can see, it's going on quite smoothly, but will require roughly 2 coats before a solid colour is achieved. To thin your paint down, I mostly just use water. You can use mediums if you want, but for these quick batches of line troops, I'd save mediums for more intricate characters or advanced glazing techniques. But for these, honestly, a good 1-to-1 mix of paint and water, and you'll be right. The first stage of this black method might be the more time-consuming part of the job, because you're going to want to establish the points of the armour where the black will be most reflective. The Dark Angels, in my opinion, had more of a deliberate polished black as opposed to another Legion that also utilised black, so I represent this by using Citadel's Incubi Darkness and gave a semi-chunky highlight around all the armour panels. Use a steady hand as best you can, but this is one of the reasons why we based the model in the black with Doom Death Black over our spray, which in my case was grey, but so we can simply whip out the same black and correct any mistakes we make before continuing on. This step is important to do now before we start the glazing, because I wanted somewhere for the glaze to build as opposed to settle. If you've seen some of my other glaze videos in this series, you'll notice that here we won't have the shaded areas settle toward the bottom parts of the panels, and you'll see why soon. Honestly, the thicker you go with this step, the more prominent the shine will be on your armour, so while I would recommend keeping it more on the thin side, don't worry too much because the glaze will still work. And now we will start to build that glaze up, and for this I use 2 thin coats Hydra Green. Massive jump obviously from black, so most colours outside of grey usually are, but as usual thin your paint heavily, around 2 to 3 parts water to 1 part paint, and put very little on your brush at a time and just build it up gradually. So with glazing, we want to end our brush stroke where we want the paint strongest and start where we want it weakest. So for this scheme, we're doing something a little different than most and glazing toward the tops and bottoms of all the panels and leaving the center darkest. Remember to get closer and closer to the edges where you did that first highlight with each pass, so as to build that smooth color transition. With Hydra Green, it took about 2 to 3 passes to get that nice solid color. And again, I'd recommend bringing it up higher than you'd think, because you can always dial it back later. And it will look a bit of a mess getting this down, but this is the time when that glazing highlight will be most workable. So take your time and focus on raising that highlight toward the edges, and ignore the slight build up toward the centers for now. That'll be sorted later. From there, you're going to want to bring your original black back out onto your palette and begin glazing it over the overbrushed areas of the Hydra Green. This is a form of glazing, not layering, so keep the paint consistent with the 2 to 3 parts water like the Hydra Green, otherwise you may overcover some of that glaze buildup and have to start again with the Hydra Green. Working with black can be really easy most times, but be mindful that it is extremely persuasive and will overpower most colours with ease, so keep it thin, and as always, the key is very little on the brush at a time. So again, starting your brush stroke on the areas you wish the colour to be most transparent and ending it where you'd like the strongest build-up. And for a standard batch of these guys, this is as far as I'd probably take it. Again, with more important characters, I'd play with multiple colours as I build up the glaze, but to get 20 of these on the table quick, I think this is a good enough result. And still with the black out, I ran it at full strength, but just slightly watered into all the recess areas of the panels to cover any lingering Hydra Green, and to make the panels stand out even where the highlight is. Now this step might seem a bit redundant black on black, and you may even want to use a silver. I know I've seen silver used before for this reason, but I use Army Painter's matte black for all the rubber joints, just to keep it consistent with the other legions, and the matte black still has a slightly different finish to Doom Death black, so it wasn't too lost. I then recommend giving a little extra highlight to the very edges of the armor panels, just so from a distance it shows off that glazing you did a little more, and for this I used Citadel's Thunderhawk Blue. I prefer to not overdo it with black. Some people like taking it as far as light blues and going around everything, which is fine if you like the look, but for me it starts pushing away from black and more black with blue trim and not natural shine. So keep it to a minimum and confine it to extreme edges and it will look great. You can breathe now, congratulations, there's the black armour for this Dark Angel completed. As always, feel free to push it further if you'd like, but I think this is a good place to stop. Let's go on. Starting with the weapon, in this case a bolter, I'm going to layer it in black. Doesn't matter which this time because we're going to be painting it that iconic red later. Once base coated, I layered all the metallics with AK Interactive's Oily Steel. And again, because we'll be painting the casing of the bolter later, it's not overly necessary to be neat, just get that silver on nice and strong. I then washed over all the metallic areas with Pro Acryl's black wash. Now if you want to do the red casing the Dark Angels sometimes used, I started with 2 thin coats Asmodeus red and carefully laid it all over the areas I wanted it to be red. Here it might look like a brighter red, but I'm actually just relayering over with Asmodeus red and gradually building up that colour towards the edges. Once I was happy with the gradual build-up of the base red, I used Sanguine Scarlet, also from 2 thin coats, and carefully highlighted around the red casing. And as a final highlight, I used 2 thin coats Demon Red to just gradually build up the extreme edges of the casing. Starting on the metallics now, on the rest of the armour, I used Pro Acryl's Dark Silver and used this on the strapping on his chest, the vents on his backpack, and any accessories found around the head. I've seen Dark Angels with random vents and accessories use red just to break up a bit of that black, to note squads or ranks, so feel free to pick and choose here what you want painted silver. And once all the metallics were done, I went over them quickly with the same black wash from Pro Acryl. I was ready to wrap it up here and call it a day, but I thought it needed something to make it really stand out as a Dark Angel, even for just your standard frontline Marine. So here I decided to try some freehand checkers, which the Dark Angels use often. To start these, I used Asmodeus Red again and painted a faint cross as an indication point where I'd like the checkers to sit. And from there begin to fill them in. Keep the paint very thin and gradually use the black as a bit of a rubber or eraser for the red and shape them accordingly until you're happy with the shape. And you can do as many of these as you like, also in any size, it's up to you. My guy will use 2 red and 2 black on the front of his pauldron as a simple squad marking. This part isn't overly necessary if you want to leave it where it was, but I use 2 thin coats Emperor Red as a highlight toward the center cross point of the red to give it a little more worn look. And gradually building up to 2 thin coats Centurion Red as a final highlight. For the eyes, I just picked out the lenses with Pro Acryl's Titanium White, and then used Citadel's contrast paint Magma Droth Flame just to fill in the lenses and bring out a nice bright orangey red lens. And there you have it, a Dark Angel Legionnaire using the glazing method for a more polished black look. As usual, I like to keep these paint alongs simple so as to show good starting points to build from should you wish to take them further, and also as a good practice point. But thanks again, please let me know in the comments if you like these types of methods and if you painted along, or if you picked anything up new from this, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks again.